Hi guys. So today I'm going to walk you through not only how to think and process a continuity and change over time essay, but also how to set one up so that you can kind of lay out an argument that's pretty successful. So I want to begin with the thinking process when it comes to a continuity and change over time essay. Let's begin by looking at a sample prompt. So this prompt says, evaluate the extent to which transatlantic interactions from 1600 to 1763 contributed to fostering change in labor systems in the British North American colonies. Now, just like any other prompt, there's specific components to APUSH prompts that you're going to kind of see over and over again. The first one that we always want to identify is what's the skill. In this case, the word change indicates that this is a continuity and change over time essay. But even more important than that, the focus here is on changes and not continuities. And that's super important because it means that we got to focus on figuring out what is changing about the British North American colonies during this time period when we go to actually set up our essay. Now, the next thing we need to kind of think about is, okay, changes. What is the main focus? What is the big changes that we're looking for? And it's there highlighted in purple. Labor systems in the British North American colonies are what we're supposed to be arguing about. What's changing about these labor systems? I'm not looking about any other changes, but the focus of the actual essay. Some essays have what we call a force, which is it kind of creates limitations on what you should be writing about in terms of changes. So when we talk about labor systems in the British North American colonies, we want to specifically talk about changes that are being created as a result of transatlantic interactions. And then we should always note the time period, which in this case is 1600 to 1763, because any citation that comes out of that time period is not going to count in the essay overall. Now, this is a great example of a typical College Board style question, because what College Board will tend to do is they tend to take simple concepts or big concepts rather that we've definitely talked about and kind of make the wording different so that it sounds a little bit more sophisticated and complicated than it actually is. So if we were to break down this question and kind of simplify it, ultimately this question is asking, how is the connection between the old world and the new world changing the way that the colonists worked and made a living? That's a simplified version of what we're seeing here. And if we kind of simplify that and we know, okay, we're looking at what's changing about the lives of the colonists, what's changing about the way that they work, the way that they maybe make a living, that's a much more maybe approachable way of thinking about this question than the way that it's originally worded. So if you can break down the different parts of the prompt and then even maybe kind of reword it in your own language, simplify it, that's a good way of maybe kind of making the prompt make more sense to you. So that takes us to our next step. Now, once we've kind of broken down the question, the next thing we want to do is we want to kind of maybe just brainstorm as many pieces of evidence or as many big historical trends that we can think about in relation to the prompt. So between 1600 and 1763, what are some maybe big terms or ideas that I know that could potentially be used in a later essay? So I'm going to brainstorm, maybe rattle off as fast as I can. Maybe I know Jamestown. Maybe I know John Rolfe and the introduction of tobacco. Maybe I know the first slaves arriving in 1619, the Virginia slave laws. Obviously you're going to try to do a brainstorm in about 30 seconds. And we're trying to just stimulate your background knowledge about the topic so that you can start to create larger arguments. So these are some of the potential pieces of evidence that might work for this prompt, and you can take a look at them right here. But just writing them in kind of a scattered way is probably not the best way to organize yourself and prepare to write a continuity and change over time essay. Continuity and change over time is really, really relying on an understanding of chronological order. And this is so important, so key to being able to do this particular skill successfully. It's not enough just to say, okay, here are the things that happened between 1600 and 1763. We also want to know what is the order in which they happened. And the reason why we need to know the order in which they happened is because if I start to chronologically put them in order, from the first event to the last event, it becomes easier for me to identify bigger trends, things that are changing over time, or maybe things that are staying consistent. So this is that same list, only now it's been put into chronological order. And I've even put in some of the important dates here so that you can see when they took place. So this is a kind of a scattering of, Jamestown being the first thing that happened to the last thing that I listed, the Stonewall Rebellion in 1739. Now, if you've ever had like a teacher that said, hey, dates aren't important, well, that's not necessarily true for this class, because in order to really do this skill, you need to know the order in which things occurred. Now, it's possible that you don't remember the exact date. That is okay. No one says you have to know every single date in order to be able to successfully do continuity and change over time. But you at least need to be able to put the events in a general order in which they happen so that you have a better idea of how the time period progressed. And you can then make better arguments about what's changing and what's staying the same over time. Okay, so it's like at least I don't maybe know the exact year that the first slaves arrived in Jamestown, but I know that maybe tobacco was introduced first. And I know that obviously Jamestown had to be created first before that happened. And so maybe I can piece together the general order. Now, once I know what the general order is, once I've kind of laid out the time period, I'm going to kind of look from beginning to end for specific trends, bigger trends in terms of what's changing, what's staying the same. Now, our prompt focuses on changes, so that's what I'm going to really focus on when I'm looking at this. But over time, I see a number of things looking at this list that are happening. For example, there's clearly some major changes in terms of the use of slavery within the colonies. So we can see, for example, at the beginning, there is no slavery. We know because the first slaves weren't actually introduced until 1619. And then we start to see that there's so much slavery happening that by 1661, the Virginia slave laws are being put in place. So if they're starting to pass legislation, that we know there's an increase in slavery in the colonies. By 1739, we know that there's a rebellion, a slave rebellion. And so that indicates an increase in the use of slaves within the colonies from this time period. So that's the kind of like chronological thinking that I'm trying to do. And putting the things in order is going to help you achieve that. There's other things that we could look at here too. We could look, for example, if we wanted to do instead of, say, like the increase in slavery, we could talk a little bit about like changes in mercantilism and like the system of mercantilism. How, there's no real mercantilistic laws at the beginning, but then we start to see the beginnings of mercantilism with the Navigation Acts in the 1660s. And if I wanted to kind of continue on, I could talk about like the Dominion of New England later in the period. So that's another kind of example of how looking at the time frame and looking at the events in chronological order helps me identify those big trends. Okay, so obviously continuities would also be something. Now, when I'm putting together my essay, typically I want two arguments that directly address the skill. So this particular prompt is asking for specifically changes. So maybe I could say a growth of mercantilistic laws. Maybe I could say an increased reliance on slavery. But I also, in order to get complexity, which is what we call our X argument, I also would try to find something that's not changing, that's staying the same from the beginning to end. Well, I can see obviously here that very early on, there's the introduction of tobacco. And then I know based on the Navigation Acts, like what enumerated goods they had, that most of the goods that were enumerated were like raw materials. And then maybe I continue to see that based off of like things that the colonies are producing later on. So maybe I could say a continued reliance on agriculture throughout the entire time period. Maybe that could be a continuity. So that's what I'm trying to do when I think about continuity and change over time. So ultimately, I'm going to take those ideas and I'm going to turn them into the basis of a thesis. So when I set up, I'm going to have my two changes. My first change is going to be my A argument. My second change is going to be my B argument. And then my continuity is going to be my X or complexity argument. So it might look something like this. Change 1, increased use of slavery in the colonies. Change 2, increase in labor uprisings. Maybe my continuity then is just a constant labor shortages. throughout the entire time period because of just the fact they were producing raw materials. And then I would take that, and that would become my thesis. So we use in this class a pretty simple thesis structure. It's a formula, and it's basically although X, A plus B. And so once I have my big categories, which I brainstormed using kind of that chronological thinking, I can then plug those categories into this thesis formula in order to get a pretty well worded and smooth thesis that addresses all parts of the prompt. So taking a look at this, here we have, there's my categories up here. I'm going to drop those in, and you can see like I've color coded it, which category matches what part of the thesis I'm going to put it in. But it says, using this although X, A plus B, I could write a thesis that says, although the British colonial labor systems continue to have a demand for labor, there's my continuity, labor systems changed with the increased use of slavery in the colonies and increased labor uprisings due to transatlantic interactions from 1600 to 1763. Now, it's really important that when we're putting together a thesis for continuity and change over time, that we use the language of the skill. So I'm going to use words like continued, stayed the same, or changed, and so on. So let's keep going. All right, so what we're going to do next is I'm going to kind of walk you through how to write a full essay using continuity and change over time. And I'm going to look at a essay prompt that we've done before. Okay, so let's begin. So here's an essay prompt that you guys have had. And this is one on foreign policy. So we did this LEQ. It says, evaluate the extent to which foreign conflicts fostered changes in American foreign policy from 1789 to 1830. So how are basically problems with other countries like changing America's foreign policy and the way that we deal with those countries? That's essentially what this prompt is looking at. We always want to take the first step and break down the question. So the skill, that keyword there, changes, indicates it's continuity change over time with a focus on change. So that helps me set up like my A and B arguments are going to be changes. My X argument is going to be a continuity. My main focus is on American foreign policy. So I'm going to have to make sure that I'm talking about what's changing about foreign policy. That's what my target is, or my main focus. My force, the thing that's kind of creating parameters for those changes, is foreign conflicts. And then my time period, 1789 to 1830. And I always need to acknowledge that time period because I'm only allowed to use citations that or evidence that comes from that era. So I want to kind of just make a mental note. 1789 is really the year that the Constitution is ratified. And then 1830 really takes me beyond the Monroe Doctrine into the presidency of Andrew Jackson. Okay, so this is the time range that I'm dealing with, all in our early American history. Okay, so just like I did before, I'm going to just kind of brainstorm a laundry list of terms. What comes to mind immediately when we talk about foreign policy? And I want to do this quickly when I'm preparing for my essay as part of my planning. You don't want to sit there and spend like 10 minutes coming up with different types of evidence. You want to just do, what is the first things that come to mind? What are some specific terms and other stuff that you can throw in there? And really, then you've got to kind of really take no more than 30 seconds to a minute to do this because you don't want to waste too much time and then lose out on your opportunities to write. So I'm going to just kind of brainstorm everything that I can think of from French Revolution, Proclamation of Neutrality. Okay, I can just go through in my head, what's happening in terms of foreign policy in Washington's administration? What's happening with Jefferson? What's happening with Madison? What's happening with Monroe? And I forgot Adams. So what are happening in those presidencies, or just try to kind of work through all the different events. And so you see here as a list of different things, and I've organized them primarily in chronological order. You don't have to do that immediately. You could just maybe jot down some stuff that come to mind immediately, and then maybe kind of look to like arrange them quickly in a chronological order before you start to search for bigger changes and continuities, bigger trends that will help you create arguments for your thesis. Okay, so this goes all the way up to the Monroe Doctrine, which would be in 1823. So there's a lot of stuff here to work with. Okay, so once I have my evidence, I'm going to start to say, okay, what bigger trends can maybe I create arguments for? Looking at this list from start to finish, what's staying the same, what's changing? So maybe my first change, as I look through this list, I'm saying, the government is definitely doing more to kind of regulate and control foreign trade. So we went from having very few like government responses to foreign trade to all of a sudden having some very, very powerful responses. So we don't see a lot of for example, protective tariffs. We don't see a lot of government involvement in fostering trade during, say, Washington's administration. But by the time you get to Jefferson, even though he's a believer in smaller government, he's taking some extreme steps to decide who we're allowed to trade with and who we're not. Through the Embargo Act and the Non-Intercourse Act. It's not on here, but you got Makin's Bill number 2. And then you can talk about the War of 1812, how that was a war that was fought to protect American trade and neutrality at sea. All right, so let's just put the ones in yellow as part of that first change. The second change, which is the growing power and respect in international affairs. If you look at this list, over time, America is becoming more respected. America is gaining a little bit more power on the world stage. And we can see that with things like the Barbary Pirates, that gains respect for the United States internationally in the War of 1812, which confirms our independence. And then by the time you get to the Monroe Doctrine, now America is making these proclamations to the world about how we expect the rest of the world to kind of view the Western Hemisphere. So this is obviously a major change. A continuity, just kind of looking at this, sometimes we forget that Native Americans are a part of early foreign policy. But remember, the United States classifies Native Americans as a foreign entity at this time period. They're not considered part of the United States. They weren't included in our Constitution. And so we take a look at from the start of this time period to the end, the United States is fighting with Native Americans for control of Western lands. So that could be a continuity. Now, these aren't the only changes or continuities that we could use. There are others as well. So here is 3 different ones. So I just changed it up. So taking a look at this, here's 3 different arguments that could be easily made. And all of these are right. It's just a matter of executing them when we get into our essay. So a different change might be increased conflict with foreign powers. So we can see that starting with the XYZ affair and then moving into the Barbary Pirates and then finally a full-blown war with Great Britain in the War of 1812. Another change could be increasing aggressive attempts to acquire new land. So over time, America is doing more extreme things to get new territory, from negotiating for territory in Jay's Treaty to then buying territory with the Louisiana Purchase, and then in the Adams-O'Neill Treaty, we got Florida after Andrew Jackson was going into Florida and attacking Native Americans who were also attacking the United States, and so. There's actually aggressive actions that are being taken to secure control of Florida. So things are becoming more aggressive, and that might fit with a change. And then, of course, the continuity is throughout this entire time period, America is trying to remain neutral, trying to do what they can to avoid foreign entanglements and foreign alliances. But obviously, knowing the chronology allows me to see those changes. Because that's what I have to do. That's what I have to argue in a continuity and change over time essay. I have to kind of argue for a change or an evolution over time within my body paragraphs. Otherwise, it's just a cause and effect relationship. Oh, this happened. Now, this is different. We're trying to kind of paint a picture of the start to end of the time period. What's different? What's changing over time, and what is not. So this is just kind of a way to think about that. Okay, so let's take one of those 2 sets. I'm taking the first one, and let's kind of apply that to a thesis. So if my first change was increased regulation of foreign trade, and my second change was growing power and respect in the international community, and my continuity was continued conflict with Native Americans over Western lands, I would then just put that into my although X A plus B structure. So it might look like this when I insert it. Although conflicts with Native Americans continued from 1789 to 1830, foreign conflicts changed foreign policy through increased regulation of foreign trade and growing power and respect for the United States within the international community. All right, so like that would cover, you'll notice once again, I'm using the language of the skill. So not only am I using words like continued and changed, but even when I'm making arguments in my thesis, I'm not saying this led to, this caused, or this was different than. Those are different skills. I'm using words that indicate an evolution or a continuation, increased regulation of foreign trade, growing power and respect. So those are words that indicate change, and that's the kind of language that you want to use when you're putting together your thesis. All right, let's keep going. I want to talk before we move on to our paragraph construction and our contextualization about the most common mistake that I see when I'm looking at thesis statements about continuity and change over time. So this is an absolute don't do. All right, and let me go back. Oh, there it is. So this is a must not do. Like I see a lot of students make this mistake. So this is a common thesis that I get from students that just misses the mark, and I'll explain why in a second. It sounds okay on the surface, but I'm going to explain why it doesn't work and it wouldn't meet the criteria for this question. So it says, although throughout this time period, the U.S. had conflicts with Native Americans. So far, so good. Increased regulation of foreign trade and growing power of the United States led to changes in foreign policy. Okay, now that looks like it's accurate because after all, I'm looking at change one. It says increased regulation of foreign trade. Well, it's right there. Growing power and respect of international affairs. Well, it's right there. But if we look a little closer, number one, you're not arguing for continuity and change over time. This is a causation thesis. Because in this thesis, if you look a little bit more closely, it's saying increased regulation and of foreign trade and growing power of the United States led to changes in foreign policy. Okay, so this is like, these are causes of changes in foreign policy. That's not what the skill of the question is, nor does it answer the question. The target of the question is what's changing about foreign policy. And this just says that this stuff is leading to foreign policy changes, but it doesn't say what those foreign policy changes actually are. So this is a really awkward and bad way to word your thesis. And this is something that needs to be avoided. And it's a common mistake that students make when putting together a continuity and change over time essay. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. Okay, so all right. So next we're going on to our contextualization. Now, we always put our contextualization together after we've done our thesis. And the reason is we don't want to double dip our contextualization with our thesis. So when we put together our contextualization, we don't want to argue anything in that contextualization that we're arguing in our thesis statement. Otherwise, you're not going to get your points for your contextualization. It has to be something that's different. Contextualization is supposed to set up those arguments that you're making in that thesis. And so, like, what we want to do is when we get put together our contextualization, we always want to ace our contextualization. And what that means is that we want to kind of create a contextualization that is kind of formatted using kind of that same philosophy that we use when we do our short answer. I'm sorry. So we want a big trend. That's our A. We want a citation that illustrates that trend. And then our E is our explanation of how that citation and that bigger trend relate to our prompt. So if our question is, evaluate the extent to which foreign conflicts fostered changes in American foreign policy from 1789 to 1830, we need to ask ourselves, okay, what is happening at this time period that, what's happening either during or before this time period that is helping us understand the changes that we're going to talk about in this essay? So, like I always say, and this is just my personal preference, I always tell students to try to take their contextualization from the events that are happening either at the very beginning of the time period or immediately before. And the reason why I tell students to do that is because by doing it that way, you're not going to double dip. You're not going to infringe on evidence or big ideas that you want to insert into your later paragraphs or insert as an argument within your thesis. Okay, you're less likely to try to have that overlap. You want the contextualization to kind of flow into the big arguments without taking away from them. So let me explain by what I mean by that. Here's a good example of a contextualization that follows that ACE structure, that answer, citation, explanation. So in order to understand the extent to which foreign conflicts fostered changes in American foreign policy, one must first understand the French Revolution. So that's my big trend. The French Revolution was ongoing. That's my big trend that I want to kind of talk about, that I think creates background for the changes that I'm going to discuss. Now, the French Revolution, I'm going to explain it, and I'm going to illustrate it with a citation, dominated foreign affairs in early American history. The French Revolution broke out in 1789 as Washington was shaping the new government under the Constitution. Washington issued the Proclamation of Neutrality in 1793 because he felt that America was too weak to get involved. So there's my citation. Proclamation of Neutrality. That was America's response to the French Revolution. Now I need to connect it to the prompt. Although the U.S. did not intervene and help the French, questions over foreign policy continue to cause political discord within the new government, and those debates about neutrality would shape foreign affairs in the years of the Constitution. Okay, so that's how I'm connecting it. Like the ongoing debates of the French Revolution are going to shape the way that Americans see foreign policy, and it's going to kind of propel us into those changes that I'm going to talk about in my thesis. Right? So now this isn't the only contextualization that you could have. Here's some other examples of contextualization. And once again, remember, no double dipping. So like, for example, the American Revolution. I can talk about the American Revolution as long as I explain how it ties back to this idea of foreign policy. So maybe I talk about how the American Revolution created an original alliance with the French, the Treaty of Alliance, as it was sometimes known, and that they fulfilled their obligation to us and helped us gain our independence with the Treaty of Paris. And that caused us to feel obligated to them in the 1790s and in the 1800s. Therefore influencing our foreign policy. Maybe you could talk about the Articles of Confederation and the big trends of the Articles of Confederation, how this was a weak system of government. It really didn't provide for a foreign policy at all because we had no navy, we had no military. It was so weak. Our military was so weak that there was Shays' Rebellion, maybe that's my citation, that almost overthrew the government of Massachusetts. And then I could say that we weren't able to establish an actual foreign policy until after the articles were removed, and we created a new system with the U.S. Constitution. And of course, the U.S. Constitution could be another trend, kind of along the same lines. The Napoleonic Wars are not before; it's during, but it would also work. Explaining how the Napoleonic Wars created conflict between Great Britain and France, how the United States got caught up in the middle of that, and how that affected our foreign policy. As long as I'm not double dipping. So like this is kind of really, really important. If I'm going to talk about like America and the foundations of neutrality with Washington's Proclamation of Neutrality as my contextualization, one of my arguments should not be neutrality then. All right, that would be too closely aligned with one another. I can't say, hey, my contextualization is neutrality and my continuity is neutrality. Okay, but if I'm going to talk about neutrality here, I might use that to springboard how America over time is moving away from neutrality and becoming more aggressive with their interactions with other countries and starting wars. So that's kind of how we need to think about that. So you got to compartmentalize. The contextualization should build into and kind of set up your thesis, set up your arguments, but it should not be a part of your thesis. And so that's important to understand. Okay, so that gets us into our body paragraphs. Now, when we get into our body paragraphs, your intro paragraph is going to start with your contextualization, and then it's going to be your thesis. And then you're going to have a body paragraph for each major argument you're trying to make. Your first change, your second change, your continuity. For each of those body paragraphs, we have to start off with a topic sentence. And I cannot tell you how many students across the country do not do this. It's a really simple trick, and it's an easy way to really kind of clearly argue for a change or a continuity over time. Across the country, a lot of students don't start with a clear argument or a clear line of reasoning. And so what they just do is they just describe events from the start to the finish, and without any kind of specifying, here's the change that I'm arguing. And so that's not the best way to kind of write one of these papers. We don't want to leave it open to as a mystery. What is your change? What is your continuity? We want to be very clear to the grader, like, hey, here is my first change, and then start to build that change and show the evolution that's happening over time. Or here's my continuity, and here's how this is consistent. Okay, so right away, hit me with your topic sentence. Use the words of the skill. Say like, here's this is changing, this is staying the same, and then include usually about 2 pieces of evidence per paragraph. That's a good rule of thumb because that's going to build a stronger argument. And when you do your paragraph structure, you want to kind of sort your evidence within each paragraph in chronological order, so you can see that change, so you can see that continuity over time. Now, when you're choosing evidence, I recommend using Quizlet terms or use specific, like proper nouns if you can, events that have or specific people that are specific to that time period. You want to avoid broad concepts because that's not really going to get you those evidence points. And then for every piece of evidence, always explain how this relates to your argument. How is this painting a change? How is this painting a continuity? So let's take a look at what that looks like. All right, so let's begin with the topic sentence. When you're doing a topic sentence, I know it seems like basic, but it's one of the most important things that you can do when you're trying to make a good argument, and it's one of the things that students do the least. And I'm not sure why that is, but it's super important to being able to get your argumentation points and really developing a better kind of analysis over the course of your essay. So we're always going to take one of our categories that we had in our thesis, and we're going to create a topic sentence off of it. So one of my categories was like a growing power and respect. So I'm just going to start with a statement that clearly lays out my point of argumentation. Between 1789 and 1830, U.S. foreign policy changed by growing in power and respect within the international community. So America is becoming more respected, and they're becoming more powerful. Now, here are some common things that students do that are wrong. Number one, they don't have a topic sentence at all. And they just start to describe early time period. At the beginning of this time period, there was Washington, and then after that there was Adams, and this is what happened. And then after that, it's just this list of things that happened. There's no argumentation. You're not going to get any argumentation points for doing that. You have to be talking about a specific change that's happening or a specific continuity. The next thing is, instead of addressing the skill, a lot of people will do like, you started off with the right skill in your thesis, and then when you get to your topic sentence, all of a sudden it becomes a different skill. It becomes cause and effect. So students will say, international conflicts led to many changes in American foreign policy, or led to a war. And it's not describing an evolution. You're just saying this happened. Okay, so we want to describe a continuity or a change, and that's obviously a big issue. Another is to write a topic sentence that doesn't actually address the target. So if I'm talking about foreign policy, every so often I'll get students that'll write me a change that isn't about foreign policy. They'll start talking about the market revolution, or they're going to start talking about this slavery within the United States. Make sure that your category is related to the actual target, foreign policy. And then the last thing is, I have a lot of students who preview terms in their topic sentence. This is not the time for that. You don't have to list off all of your evidence that's going to be in your paragraph. In fact, avoid the terms. That comes later. Topic sentence is just laying out your argument. So avoid those pitfalls because that'll weaken your overall argument over the course of your essay. Okay, so let's talk about how to actually then use citations to build an argument. So once I have my topic sentence, now I have to kind of build evidence to support it. Now, I always talk about like circular logic in this class, this idea that you have a topic sentence, that's your point of reasoning, and then everything else should kind of like explain something that happened, illustrate it, and then tie it back. Always be tying back your history to that larger argument. Okay, and that's kind of that you're closing that circle of logic, and you're always trying to kind of further the change that you're trying to make, or you're furthering the continuity that you're trying to make. Now, this is like kind of the same type of thinking that we practice all the time when we do ACE. If our topic sentence is our A, then you would have a citation, and then you would always tie it back. It's the same thing when you do a body paragraph. You know, your topic sentence is going to lay out your change. You're going to cite a term, you're going to explain it, and then you're going to always tie it back. It's the same format as of ACE that we've been practicing all year. So looking at this particular topic sentence that says between 1789 and 1830, the U.S. foreign policy changed by growing in power and respect within the international community. There's my topic sentence. That's my A. Okay. Now, I have a number of different citations that I could use. Barbary Pirates, War of 1812, Monroe Doctrine. So I'm going to probably start with my earliest example because remember, I'm showing continuity and change over time. So I want to start from the beginning of the time period and then kind of work my way to the end of the time period. So the first time, like chronologically, the first thing that happened was the Barbary Pirates. And those were at the beginning of Jefferson's presidency in the early 1800s. So I want to cite the Barbary Pirates. I want to explain what it is. That's my C. And then I want to tie it back to how this shows a change and specifically a growing amount of power and respect for the United States and the world. So here's what I have right here. And I'm going to kind of just obviously share it with you. In the early 1800s, the United States' trade was threatened by the Barbary Pirates. The Barbary Pirates demanded bribes from Jefferson's administration in return for the ability to trade in the Mediterranean. Unwilling to pay these bribes, which had increased over time, Jefferson sent the U.S. Navy into the Mediterranean, leading to the Tripolitan War. Now, here's the thing. I'm giving a lot of information here. I'm a history teacher. You probably don't have to be this detailed. Typically try to have like 2 specific details about each piece of evidence. But what I've done here for my C is I've just laid out, without a doubt, this is what the Barbary Pirates were in history. Now, the last step is to explain how does the Barbary Pirates show this change of growing respect and growing power. Well, this is where I kind of complete the circle of thought. The Barbary Pirates demonstrates a change in American foreign policy because prior to this, the United States agreed to pay these bribes. And although the U.S. never achieved a decisive victory in the war, the decision to fight for trading rights in the Mediterranean resulted in increased respect for the young country. Okay, so I'm saying like we're changing our policy. Before we just paid the bribe. And now we're deciding to defend ourselves. We're standing up for ourselves. And that's showing like growing power. It's maybe going to give us more respect overseas. And so that's kind of building that argument for growing power, growing respect. Now, the key here, and this is super important, is successfully linking this citation with another citation so that we can build a really, really strong paragraph. Okay, and that's what I do right here. So this is a full paragraph for this essay about changes in foreign policy. And what you're going to notice here is I've started to link and chain together citations in order to make the strongest argument possible. And as I chain evidence together, I'm chaining it in chronological order to show that change over time. To show, hey, this is consistent throughout time. Okay, so here I have a full paragraph, which I'll go through with you. And you'll notice, once again, I'm following that circular logic. I'm following that A structure. So my A is going to be my topic sentence. Then I'm going to pull in a citation, and I'm going to tie it back. And then I'm going to transition to another a citation, I'm going to cite it, and then I'm going to tie it back. So there's that logic, that circular logic. So let's kind of continue. Between 1789 and 1830, U.S. foreign policy changed by growing in power and respect within the international community. Oops, this is, I mislabeled this. This is supposed to be blue. But this first sentence right here is my A. Okay, so this is supposed to start my citation, but let's begin right there. So this is highlighted slightly wrong, but it says, in the early 1800s, the United States trade was threatened by the Barbary pirates. There's my first citation, and you'll notice this first citation follows exactly what we just talked about. So I'm not going to restate it. Okay, but now how do I take that example that I was on the last slide? How do I link it with another piece of evidence? Well, I'm now going to choose a piece of evidence that came later. So I told you I could have talked about either the War of 1812 or the Monroe Doctrine. I'm going to do the War of 1812. I'm going to link the Barbary pirates to that war and show how this is a change that's happening from the beginning to the end of this time period. So I like to use transitional sentences, so it's not abrupt. So I finished the first citation, and then I'm going to transition to the next one by saying American power would only continue to grow with new conflicts such as the War of 1812. So it's in growing more as time goes on. That kind of like furthers this idea of growing power, growing respect. And then I'm going to hit my reader with the next citation. The War of 1812 was fought between the U.S. and Great Britain because the British failed to respect American neutrality and trading rights during the Napoleonic Wars. The issue of impressment was unable to be resolved diplomatically, and so the United States was forced to fight. So there's my citation. I've the War of 1812, and I've laid out what the War of 1812 was. Now, I have to explain, that's not enough. I need to explain why the War of 1812 is showing an increased amount of power or increased amount of respect for the United States in terms of foreign policy. So that's where we see the area in red. This represents a further change to foreign policy because of the War of 1812 confirmed upon America its independence. The war made clear to European powers that the United States was willing to stand up for its rights, and the young country was taken more seriously in foreign affairs from that point on. Okay? And don't be afraid to be obvious with it. I'm using clear words like this demonstrates a change. That's okay. There isn't technical points in this class. So it doesn't matter how many synonyms you use. It doesn't matter how fancy your language is. The most important thing is your analysis. Do you have really good analysis? Do you have a depth of thought? Okay, the actual words that you use just need to be incredibly clear. Okay, it has to be very clear with what you're trying to say and what you're trying to argue. Okay, you'll really wow the readers with your understanding of history and your analysis of how that ties in to the bigger skill, the change or the continuity over time. Don't necessarily try to wow them with your vocabulary. That's not as important here. So understanding that style is not as important as substance when it comes to AP writing. Okay, so that's all I got for you guys. Obviously, if I was continuing to write this essay, I would move on to my next change after that, new topic sentence, and I would follow the same formatting. And then I would finish off with a continuity, follow that formatting. And if I had time, I would do a conclusion with a post-contextualization so that I could try to really cover all my bases and hit on all the major points of the rubric. So that's all I got for you guys today. Hope this has helped in our understanding of continuity and change over time. Take care.